I began my baseball card collecting journey in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Trading cards on the playground at recess was a real thing. I grew up in Metro Detroit, so any Tiger had real value, especially ones that had cool names like Champ Summers. My early collecting wasn't based on stats or really anything analytical. For me, what mattered most was the team. For me, the Tigers first and Red Sox second, because that was the name of my Little League team. Secondary criteria was how sweet the image was. Just look at this image of Carlton Fisk. Landscape cards always stand out, but this image of him diving, it just made me want to be a catcher. Or this 78 Reggie Jackson, iconic-looking home run swing in Yankee Stadium, and that awesome All-Star shield in the upper corner. That's real art right there. But beyond the team and the image, the player's name could also make him collectible. And there were some cool names in 1970s and 80s baseball. Biff Pocoroba, Shooty Babbitt, Oil Can Boyd, Catfish Hunter, and Goose Gossage. But to a young boy, there was something hilarious about owning cards of Dick Pole and Pete LaCock. And to be honest, up until about a week ago, I really didn't even know anything about these two guys. Turns out they both have interesting stories and contributions to baseball. Dick Pole played with the Red Sox from 1973 to 76, and then he was selected 7th overall in the expansion draft by the brand new Seattle Mariners, and he finished his career there. After a rough 4-11 start in 1978 and an ERA well over 6, Dick was sent down to the San Jose Missions of the PCL. In 1979, the Mariners outright released him. He pitched for a few seasons in the Mexican League before calling it quits. In the end, Dick had a 6-year career in the majors, accumulating a negative 2.5 WAR. But it wasn't as a player where Dick would really stand tall. He made his mark as a coach, and he may have been critical to one of the best pitchers of our modern era, Greg Maddux. Dick spent 5 years in the Cubs system, working at Quad City, Pittsfield, and Iowa before he landed his first job as a major league pitching coach in 1988 under Don Zimmer. It isn't always the most talented player who makes a good coach, and that held true here. Dick was a good pitching coach. He learned some tough lessons as a player, and in particular, something that would turn out to be key for Hall of Famer Greg Maddux. Dick said, quote, "Louis Tiant always said I should throw changeups, but I was young and hard-headed, and I relied too much on my fastball. It didn't help then, but it helped me in my coaching life." Yeah, it sure did. With Dick on staff, Greg Maddux arrived in spring training of 1988 after 2 seasons of, honestly, pretty poor pitching with the Cubs. Nobody could predict that Greg Maddux, this guy with a career 8-18 record, would invert that, going 18-8 that season. And that he would go on to amass a career 104 WAR, 355 career wins, and just a ridiculous 4 Cy Young awards in a row. The secret? Well, Maddux didn't have a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Hell, he didn't have a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. As Greg Maddux said, quote, "Dick taught me how to throw pitches. Dick Pole told me one day, 'Why don't you stop trying to strike guys out? Just try to get them out.' And he was right." Pole served as pitching coach for the Cubs for 4 years, from 1988 to 91. Then he joined Dusty Baker as pitching coach of the Giants in 93. Dusty said, "I'd always wanted a left-handed pitching coach, and the more I was around him, the more I saw that he thought like a left-hander, although he's a righty. Left-handers usually throw less heat. They have to know how to pitch more, which is what it's all about." Dick would serve as the bullpen coach for the Red Sox in 98, pitching coach for the Angels in 99, Indians in 2000 and 2001, and then the Expos in 2002. He was back with the Cubs in 2003 as a bench coach through 2006, where he intersected with Adam Greenberg. And shameless promotion, if you haven't seen my video with Adam, I really feel it's worth your time to hear his story directly from him. In any case, Dick finished his career as pitching coach for the Reds from 2007 to 2009. Dick has some pretty good-looking baseball cards, but probably his most popular card for any 12-year-old boys that you might know is his 1980 TCMA Portland Beavers card. Enough said. Based on the latest news I could find, Dick is healthy and 74 years old. I believe he's living in Sarasota, Florida, and I wish him well. Now, let's segue from Dick to LaCock. Pete LaCock's given name is Ralph Pierre LaCock. At some point in his life, I'm guessing he went with Pete, probably because his dad's name was Peter. If you're over 50, you probably remember the TV show Hollywood Squares. Pete's dad is Peter Marshall, the show's host. Pete was a high school stud. He was drafted in the first round by the Cubs in 1970 right out of high school in Woodland Hills, California. Just 2 years later, he had accelerated up through the minor leagues into the majors. In his September call-up in 1972, he played in 5 games and hit .500 as a right fielder. In his first game as a major leaguer, Pete pinch hit for the pitcher in the top of the 5th, put good wood on the ball, and singled to left. A good start, but it wouldn't last. Pete struggled to hit when he finally got a real chance to play regularly in 1975. The Cubs of this era were not good, but even so, Pete found himself as part of a 3-way trade in December of '76, sending him to Kansas City. He would have career years in '77 and '78 when he hit a combined .298 with a .754 OPS and a 1.8 WAR, now playing first base. If you ever see Pete at a local show, and he does do signings, you'll probably get to see his 1980 AL Championship ring. That year, he played in the World Series alongside one of my favorites, Dan Quisenberry. But the best story related to LaCock concerns him and the Hall of Famer Bob Gibson. Gibby was known as one of the toughest guys you'll ever meet. To call him a fierce competitor is an understatement. Gibby was at the end of his career in 1975. In the final game of his career, he was in the top of the 7th inning facing the Cubs when Pete LaCock stepped to the plate with the bases loaded and 2 outs. Pete crushed a fastball into deep right field for the only grand slam of his career. Gibson then got Don Kessinger to ground out, and that was the end of Bob's great career. But Gibson, he never forgot that at-bat against Pete. Years later, he was pitching in an old-timers game when none other than Pete LaCock stepped into the box. Gibby drilled him in the ribs with a pitch. Unbelievable. In an old-timers game. I love it. Pete is currently 73, and the last report I saw, he's living in Arizona. And finally, if you're wondering if these 2 greatly named men squared off, you're in luck. On May 29, 1978, the stars aligned. The Mariners were playing in Kansas City. Dick Pole got the start, but would only go 1 inning that day, giving up 5 runs. But in the first inning, after giving up a 2-run bomb to George Brett, Dick Pole squared off against Pete LaCock. Dick won the sword fight, with LaCock flying out to left. The 50-year anniversary is just a few years away. Let's hope that Topps makes a commemorative card. Make him squeak.